Ms Campbell.
Mr Johnson, my name is Brenda Campbell and I ask questions on behalf of the Northern Ireland COVID Bereaved Families for Justice, which means that I ask questions on behalf of people who are members of a club that they never wished to be members of, but having become members by virtue of their bereavement, they have campaigned for this inquiry. They have listened intently to all the evidence, including yours, in search for answers. And I want you to understand that the questions that I ask are asked on their behalf. And so if I may, can I ask you please to answer with clarity and with brevity those questions on their behalf? To put it bluntly, Mr Johnson, where a one-word answer is sufficient, I'll take it. It's plain from your evidence today and yesterday that you have followed a great deal of the evidence at this inquiry and that Her Ladyship has heard. You told us yesterday that you have seen the impact video that was played at the start of this module, and the impact of long COVID was reflected powerfully in that. You'll also recall, having watched that it captured the experience of our client, Martina Ferguson, who lost her mother, Ursula Derry, on the 4th of January 2021. But can I ask you, have you also listened to and watched the oral evidence from the bereaved in this module and in Module 1?
No.
Well, the question might be, why not?
Because I'm afraid I haven't been able to watch all the evidence in this inquiry.
Had you watched it, in Module 1, you would have heard the evidence of Brenda Doherty about the loss of her mother, Ruth. And at the outset of this module on the 5th of October, you would have heard the evidence of Katrina Miles, who lost her father, Gerard McLarnon, 3 years ago, in fact, this month. And if you continue to listen to further modules, you'll hear stories of further bereavement that Her Ladyship has invited to be told, understanding the pain and the distress that families feel. But one of Miss Miles's points that she told us about was a galling juxtaposition of being told on the 18th of December 2020 that her father, aged 67, was going to die in the coming days from COVID, and that he died alone. His time of death is not known, 5 days later on the 23rd of December. The juxtaposition that she told us about, that in her words was sickening, was that on the 18th of December, there were one of several Christmas events in Downing Street and around the area to have taken place that month. This particular event was a wine and cheese party and a secret Santa during a so-called business meeting. Do you understand, and on behalf of the bereaved really understand, the idea that many of those who were denied the possibility of saying goodbye to loved ones, whilst at the same time those making the draconian rules were to be seen to be flouting them, is, as Miss Miles told us, galling and sickening? Do you understand that?
Thank you. And the short answer is, as I told the chairman of the inquiry, yes, I do understand people's pain and people's offence, of course.
You see, sadly, her experience and that of her family is far from unique. The revelations of the unlawful parties and gatherings in Downing Street have, as Her Ladyship has acknowledged this morning, compounded the distress and the grief felt by families who were denied the opportunity either to say a final goodbye, or to host a wake, or to host a funeral for their loved ones. If you do understand that, as you tell us you do, why was it allowed to happen?
Thank you. I've extensively tried to explain how I think that came about and why I think the people who were working in Downing Street for a very long time and very hard believed that they were working within the rules at the time. Though, as I say to you to those you represent, and again to the to Mane. I understand fully the point that you are making, and I regret it very much.
I'm going to move on from this topic, but it's perhaps important to note that by the 18th of December 2020, there had been 86,886 COVID-related deaths that year. This, I'm going to suggest, is not a matter of hindsight. It was plain that the country and that those who were bereaved were in extreme pain and distress. Could you have done more to stop it?
To stop the pandemic?
The gatherings, the Partygate, the wine and cheese parties, the Secret Santas, the pub quizzes or the Zoom quizzes.
I had no knowledge of the event on the 18th at the time.
That was not my question.
At the time that it took place.
Could you have done more to stop it?
I think that the trouble was, as I've said, that people were working extremely hard in
Mr. Johnson, I'm going to. We've heard that.
If I'd had
my question is,
sorry, please go ahead.
And this may be one where a yes or no answer would suffice. Could you have done more to stop it?
I think the answer to that is that, given what I knew at the time about what was going on, the answer to that is no. But what I possibly should have done is issued a general instruction to everybody to be mindful of the rules and how things would appear. And as I say, I think in one of the WhatsApps that was earlier quoted by the counsel to the inquiry, that's my view.
That WhatsApp was dated almost exactly 1 year later, on the 17th of December 2021.
Ms Campbell, you need to move on.
I'm
You've gone
on.
beyond my permitted
Yes.
questions already.
On the keeping on the theme, if we may, of perhaps not doing quite enough, may I return to the issue of your communications with the devolved administrations? And you touched on this yesterday. You told us why, in your view, COBRAs at which the leaders of the devolved administrations attended were not working, and we heard about the concern of leaks and so on. But you knew when COBRAs were stopped in May 2020 that left no formal means by which you could meet the leaders of the devolved administrations in the middle of this global pandemic. You understood that, didn't you?
I don't think that's quite true. There were obviously plenty of opportunities in which I could meet the leaders of the devolved administrations. I had excellent relations both with Michelle and Arlene Foster, but as the inquiry has heard, we tried to split the labour.
Well, in fact, the decision, if you call it to split the labour, and the consequence of it was that between May and October, September 2020, you didn't have any direct meetings with the leaders of the devolved administrations. That's a fact.
Well, meetings themselves were quite difficult.
Well, but the point that I'm making to you, Mr. Johnson, is that the point of stopping the COBRAs and replacing them with Four Nations calls at which you would not be present nor participate was a deliberate decision to manage the devolved administrations.
It was my judgment that the DAs, with whom we had excellent relations, and I think that overwhelmingly things worked well across the UK. But I thought that the CDL was well placed to deal with them, and he did.
So the answer to my question, that it was a deliberate decision, is yes.
Yes.
And it was deliberate because, we've heard yesterday, it was, in your view at the time, optically wrong. It was, as you told us in your statement, more importantly because you, in that way, would not be communicating directly with the First Minister of Scotland. And it was deliberate, I think, as you told us yesterday, in order to have a mechanism that would avoid leaks or so-called divergence. But there was an opportunity, wasn't there, for some form of what you called integrated decision-making and direct communications that was, as you told us yesterday, in hindsight, desirable. But you opted not to take it. and that was the Joint Ministerial Committee. Do you agree? You opted not to take it deliberately.
I think the problem with and I remember we covered this yesterday, the problem with that particular approach was that it was still vulnerable to some of the weaknesses you've just mentioned.
The benefit of that particular approach is that it would have been an independent stream, a committee chaired by you, in which you would have met and discussed with the leaders of the devolved administrations the great crisis that this country was facing at the time. It may have been constitutionally weird, to use your word from yesterday, or perhaps even imperfect, but it was an option available to you, wasn't it?
Yes, that's certainly correct, though I want to stress that I think that the overwhelming result of the cooperation we had with the DAs was very productive and harmonious.
Your evidence yesterday, Mr Johnson, was that perhaps you should have done more on reflection.
I think what I said was that I would like what we need is some sort of leak-proof integrated system. That's the grail.
Well, surely what you needed was better forms of direct communications with the leaders of the devolved administration in an environment that best benefited communication across all of the devolved administrations.
I think we had excellent communications across all of the DAs, and I think that the overall performance of the UK in the pandemic as a single entity was remarkable, and every part of the UK played an important part in the effort. If you look at it, there was a huge amount of joined up work going on across the whole country.
Well, what credence then do you give to the complaints coming from the leaders of the devolved administrations, and I mean across the board, not just in Northern Ireland, of a high-handed, incommunicative approach from Westminster?
Well, I don't recognise that version of events.
So, just to be clear, you reject the idea of a high-handed, incommunicative approach by Westminster as complained about by the devolved administration?
I do, and I think that we had a huge amount of contact between Number 10 and the DAs, between central government and the DAs, and every effort was made to bring along everybody together.
I'm going to move on, if I may, then, to what you suggested in your statement was a way in which we could have brought everybody together, and that is your proposal for a pan-UK Civil Contingencies Act. Although that is the position in your statement, should we understand that your updated position is that there are powerful arguments against that proposal?
I've noticed in the course of these excellent hearings and the discussion that's gone on that people think that the CCA is not the right framework. I'm listening to that. I think that maybe something could be done under the 1984 Public Health Act, as I think I said yesterday. Somehow or other, I think we need to recognise that a pandemic presents a particular problem for the whole of a cross-boundary problem for the whole of the UK, and that there needs to be some sort of a way of making sure that our messages are united. That was the point I was making, and I'm sure the inquiry will attach whatever importance to this it thinks is right. But I felt during the course of the pandemic, occasionally, that messages were being blurred and people were being confused because of a succession of press conferences from different parts of the UK. Now, I may have been super sensitive to that, but I was getting quite a lot of echo about that.
Well, time permitting, I'd like to ask you some questions about that at the end, but just dealing with the issue of Pan-UK Civil Contingencies Act, you obviously now realise that your proposal for such a Pan-UK Act achieved relatively rare cross-party unity in Northern Ireland against that proposal. In fact, it was the united view that there is a need for a bespoke and devolved level response to the pandemic to take into account each administration's social political landscape. And you must surely agree, Mr Johnson, that given the regional and indeed significant geographical differences, particularly for the north of Ireland and the epidemiological reality of the island of Ireland, that any pandemic response must allow for regional flexibility and divergence.
Yes, I see that argument. I think we've had quite a lot of discussion this morning about the downsides of regional divergence and the downsides of different parts of the country taking a different approach. I think that was there was quite a lot about that this morning.
The discussion this morning focused on the difference between Devon and Cornwall and the West Midlands or further north. I'm asking you questions on behalf of the citizens of the bereaved families of Northern Ireland. Do you not agree that particularly when it comes to the north of Ireland, on the island, that there is a need to recognise the particular geographical and regional features of that place?
So when it comes to Northern Ireland, yes, clearly you're right. There's we have to take account of the greater epidemiological unity of the island of Ireland, and what you say has force.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
But, you know, I still think that there's you asked generally about the DAs. I think the more unified we can be, the better.
Well, of course, but the suggestion of unity and of an integrated approach led by Westminster, be it either written in statute or achieved by more meaningful and direct communication, must assume, mustn't it, that Westminster is capable of real leadership, both in public and behind closed doors, and it is capable of taking timely and proportionate action in response to the pandemic in all corners of the UK.
And indeed, that's what Westminster did. And I remember vividly going to Northern Ireland in early 2021 and seeing how very, very much faster the vaccines were being rolled out in Northern Ireland than they were in, and you know, nobody will thank me for saying it, but I've got to say it, than they were over the border in the EU. And there are reasons for that. And I think that
Mr. Johnson, again,
the Westminster
brevity,
approach that you've deprecated led to significant benefits for the people of Northern Ireland.
Does it follow from your agreement with that suggestion that you would not countenance binding the devolved administrations to a one-nation approach led by Westminster that flip-flopped, dithered, delayed, exercised indecision and or poor judgment?
I don't think I agreed with your approach, and it does not follow.
Divergence and clarity in messaging is something that you touched on, and my lady, it's my final topic. You blame divergence of the devolved administrations, some getting more blame than others, but you blame that divergence and differentiation of approach for the lack of clarity in messaging. And you know that the devolved administrations and the leaders who have provided statements to my lady don't necessarily agree with you. That the concerns raised by Paul Given, to take one example, is that if there is a need for divergence across the four nations, the communication around it simply needs to be managed. This was something that was not done well at the early stages of the pandemic. The Prime Minister tended to speak as though he was speaking for all four nations rather than giving space to the devolved administrations to manage communications. And my lady has heard a great deal of evidence about England-focused data being cited, about an England or even London-centric approach being adopted by Westminster. To borrow the words of Professor Henderson, if you choose not to be clear in your messaging, Mr. Johnson, do you accept that that's your choice?
I think the issue was that within the UK and accepting the particular issues raised by the island of Ireland, it's a single epidemiological unit. The trouble was that we were from time to time, and we mustn't exaggerate this, from time to time there was a dissonance in the message. I think that when message was so important, it would have been ideally we would have had complete coherence, because I think sometimes people found it hard to follow and couldn't see why one area was different from another.
Was a reason for that confusion, to the extent that there was confusion, because of your government choosing a lack of clarity in message and not respecting the clear and giving a clear understanding of the need for regional differences?
No, I think the reason was the difference in the messaging and people being confused as to what exactly they were being asked to do.
Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Ms Campbell.